welcome to Silverside Church's New Year's gathering. We're glad to have you join us, and we want to start by wishing everyone a Happy New Year. And we're using a graphic here by way of introduction of the newest member of the Silverside family, Eleanor Elmaker. Came to us in the middle of this crazy year, and her parents, Liz and Rick, were pleased to share this picture of her as part of their holiday greeting. It's a good way to start the year. It's the right image for the beginning of the year. Even in the midst of pandemic-induced anxiety and depression, there's something about the start of a new year that triggers at least a spark of optimism and hope. But as we attempt to fully access those positive feelings, it's also part of our nature to pause and reflect on what has been before we are able to embrace what we can become. In that spirit, I invite you to spend a little time this morning looking back at what Silverside Church has been, and then join me in looking forward to what together we can become. My wife Laura and I first visited what was then Second Baptist Church in early December of 1980. Our sanctuary is always a beautiful and inspiring place, but never more so than during Advent. Then, and for every Advent since that first visit, the Silverside Sanctuary becomes a glorious celebration of expectation, with its foundation of stone decorated with seasonal banners, greenery strung around the perimeter, the Christmas-adorned tree behind the lecterns, flanked by scores of scarlet-hued poinsettias, and the Advent wreath with its 5 candles awaiting its part in the unfolding story of Advent. And all of this beauty bathed in the magical light filtering through the stained glass panels and strategically placed in the walls and ceiling of the sanctuary. Breathtaking and awe-inspiring are just some of the understatements. But not this year. The glorious Advent traditions of Silverside Church were superseded by the reality of a public health crisis that bullied its way into our lives last March, and is still forcing us to forego cherished activities and intimately shared celebrations in order to protect responsibly both loved ones and strangers. Over the last 40 years, as Second Baptist Church evolved and became Silverside Church, many other traditions and activities provided a rich spiritual and social fabric that engaged and enriched us. We challenged our theologies and philosophies with the Heretics Club, stimulated our minds and enlarged our understanding through a rich mix of weekly forum programs. We came together for food and fellowship in a variety of settings: an annual summer picnic, regular potluck dinners, the children's Christmas party, and even the occasional themed event like a fiesta or a semi-annual summer night picnic. Times and people change, to be sure, and it is never sufficient to do things just because we have done them before. But I think there is a certain nostalgia about the past for those of us who experienced it firsthand. And it is important to acknowledge that good ideas and worthwhile activities can be re-energized and reimagined in fresh and meaningful ways. This past year has forced us all to adjust, to adapt, to rethink how we work, how we live, how we interact with each other. For the Silverside family, one of the biggest challenges has been to find new ways to communicate, to connect, and to worship. Transitioning abruptly from our traditional in-person Sunday gatherings to an online format brought an unavoidable learning curve, but soon became a welcome and familiar part of our week. One consequence of the shift to online has been a demonstrated increase in the number of folks who are tuning in to our gatherings, not just on Sunday mornings, but throughout the week. It appears that we are now actually reaching more people than we had been through our in-person gatherings. This does not mean that we do not yearn for a return to the sanctuary, which for many of us is an irreplaceable part of our lives. But as long as Zoom meetings, masks, and social distancing are central components of daily life, we can be thankful for our dedicated and resourceful worship team, Pastor David Farmer, Music Director Melissa Haye, and Technology Guru Blaine Breeding for their creative leadership over these past months. We bid an exhausted farewell to 2020. Too much pain for too many people in too many ways to count. We grieve for the lives lost to the pandemic, losses exacerbated by foolish science deniers and selfish demagogues. We ache for those devastated by economic stress, for the rising tide of food and shelter insecurity. We seize on the hope for a rapid and more effective deployment of new vaccines to overcome the virus. And we wait, patiently and expectantly, for better days ahead. Now we stand on the threshold of 2021, and it is both appropriate and necessary to consider what that might mean for the Silverside family. It is certain to be a year filled with challenges, both old and new, and that also means 2021 can be a year of new opportunities. There are some things of which we can be relatively certain, and even more things that are currently unknowable. Welcome to reality. As many of you know, last January, our pastor, David Farmer, announced his intention to retire after 20 years of passionate preaching and pastoral leadership for the Silverside family. Working with church council, a preliminary plan was developed that would allow the church to begin a search process and for David to finish his duties by the end of the year. Well, as someone wiser, or at least more cynical than I am, once said, humans make plans, and the universe laughs. Faced with the new constraints of the pandemic, what had been anticipated to be a transitional year for both David and Silverside was frozen in place. New priorities were identified as our staff and lay leaders focused on keeping Silverside Church functioning and maintaining the meaningful ministry under rapidly changing circumstances. At this point, with what we hope is some light at the end of this COVID tunnel, we will resume the process envisioned a year ago. However, there is no official timeline or schedule, and David is prepared to continue his service to Silverside as we seek a new transition plan that works for everyone. Church Council is committed to clear and regular communication with our members and friends as this process takes place. Meanwhile, there are both immediate and future challenges in maintaining the viability of our physical facility. In September, a mold infestation was discovered in the sanctuary. The ensuing remediation project included treatment of all surfaces, walls, ceiling, pew upholstery, the cleaning and decontamination of loose items from the sanctuary, as well as the rooms behind the main sanctuary used by the deacons and the flower committee, steam cleaning of the carpeting, and disassembly, cleaning, and reassembly of the organ pipes. The anticipated cost for this project is just under $70,000. We are both blessed and fortunate that we could move forward with this project using money from our endowment fund, but it is incumbent upon us to replace that money going forward in order to provide future support for Silverside's ministry. In addition, we anticipate the necessity to replace our freezer and at least one major HVAC unit within the next 1.5 years. With all this in mind, Church Council has authorized a new capital campaign to address these financial needs, and we expect to launch the campaign later this month. We are also finishing the annual stewardship campaign and will be presenting a final operating budget proposal to the congregation near the end of January. Given the current public health concerns, it is likely that we will not be able to convene the annual congregational meeting in person. But we are making plans for a large-scale Zoom meeting which will allow our members to review the budget and ask questions before providing approval. I am all too aware that most of what I have just shared with you about the year ahead focuses on Silverside as a religious institution, as an organization with a physical facility that requires electricity, heating and cooling, and maintenance of all kinds. An entity that supports a paid professional staff which provides immense benefits from their talents and energy. However, there are even larger issues Silverside will face in 2021. What should our ministry look like as we begin the next decade? How will we find new paths for service in a broken world? Why are we doing what we are doing? Where can we develop strategies for relevance and growth? When and how will we find the energy, the strength, and the commitment to embrace change? During our gathering last Sunday, David Farmer pointed out that Jesus had no notion of what a church might be, and certainly was not trying to establish one. He was a Jew, committed to teaching his contemporaries how their faith could be properly fulfilled. The Greek word ecclesia, commonly translated as the church, is more correctly translated as the called. Jesus was calling his disciples to act intentionally in a certain way, as opposed to organizing themselves into a new entity. However, it is a natural human instinct to associate with like-minded people. So early on, as Paul and others carried the story about Jesus and his inspirational ministry to a widening assortment of towns, villages, and finally cities around the Mediterranean rim, these new followers came together to share their experiences. This is not the time nor the place to attempt a crash course in the history of the Christian church, from Paul to Pope Benedict. But it is fair to suggest that most of that history is fraught with social and political concerns, and comparatively little reflects the remarkable message about human and divine relationships preached by Jesus of Nazareth. Now, nearly 2,000 years later, the phenomenon of the Christian church in its myriad forms is facing a persistent and serious decline, at least in the Western world. So what are we called to do in the face of this challenge? Our website offers a hint, declaring a commitment to radically embrace the teachings of Jesus in our post-church world. How is that put into practice? Some of us would place our focus on spirituality, social justice, and self-care. There are other voices in this conversation as well. Tony Campolo, Professor Emeritus of Sociology at Eastern University in St. David's, Pennsylvania, and a prominent force in evangelical Christian circles for many years, grew frustrated with the tendency of media to conflate his socially progressive evangelical brand with the message delivered by prosperity pastors, television evangelists, and radio talk show hosts who preach a conservative, nationalistic American religion favored by the political right. Campolo, along with folks like Jim Wallace, a founder of the Sojourners community, has embraced a brand they consider reflective of both their theology and their commitment to social justice. They call themselves Red Letter Christians, a reference to the frequent practice of publishers of the King James Version of the New Testament to print the passages most commonly cited as having been spoken by Jesus in red ink for emphasis. Their central point is simple. Listen carefully to the words of Jesus and then follow his example and directions. Put another way, don't get lost in the weeds. As Wallace observes, when Jesus tells us that he will regard the way we treat the hungry, the homeless, the immigrant, the poor family, the sick, and the prisoner, as if we were treating him that way, it likely means that he would not think that ignoring them is a good domestic policy. These Red Letter Christians call us to engage our world with an unapologetic determination to make things better for as many as possible. From global issues like protecting the environment, promoting peace rather than war, seeking equity for oppressed people, to domestic hot-button issues like LGBTQ rights, gun control, education, immigration, and criminal justice reforms. These are the battles we are called to engage. Underlying almost all of these issues is the fundamental challenge to fight for economic justice and undo the disastrous effects of income inequality. These are all complex problems, and there are no easy answers, but no progress can be achieved without engagement and activism. To restore and regain our relevance in a post-church world, we have to become agents for change while honoring our individual and collective spiritual journeys and offering fellowship and care for each other. It is a daunting challenge, to be sure, but I believe Silverside Church is called to act, to be part of creating the future in 2021 and beyond, following the unique example of Jesus of Nazareth. Welcome to the future. Amen.